throughout heaven and earth. I alone am the honored one. Gojo Satoru. There's a peculiar loneliness that comes with power. The kind that doesn't scream, but smirks. The kind that makes the world kneel while you forget what it feels like to stand beside someone. Gojo Satoru is the strongest sorcerer alive. Limitless, untouchable, a walking cheat code. He's the man with 6 eyes in infinite space between him and the world. But that title, the strongest, is more prison than praise. It's a badge handed to a boy who never asked for it, never wanted it, and never got to decide who he was outside of it. But this isn't a story about power, okay? This is a story about pain, 'cause for all his elegance, arrogance, and impossible strength, Gojo is, at his core, a deeply traumatized child. It's a kind of trauma that doesn't come from one moment, but from years of being turned into a myth while you're still trying to figure out if you're even a person. Okay, in a world where cursed energy is currency and childhood is collateral, Gojo never had the luxury of growing up slow. Okay, he was weaponized, exalted, and isolated, all before he had the emotional maturity to make sense of any of it. This video isn't here to romanticize him. We're here to understand him. We'll trace Gojo's icy detachment, his suffocating superiority complex, and the scars buried beneath that blindfold. We'll examine how loneliness can masquerade as confidence, and how detachment becomes necessary when your existence is reduced to utility. We'll explore avoidant attachment, emotional dissociation, and the psychological toll of being the strongest, not as a triumph, but as a trauma response. Because what if the most powerful man in the room is also the most afraid? The strongest is still a child. Power is often mistaken for maturity. But in Gojo's case, power was thrust upon someone who never had the time or safety to grow up. A child, weaponized. Gojo was born different. With the rare 6 eyes and the limitless technique, he was revered before he could understand why. Worshipped by some, feared by others, Gojo became a symbol before he became a person. This isn't a gift. This is a burden. From a psychological lens, Gojo's early life reflects what trauma expert Bessel van der Kolk refers to as developmental trauma. Not one massive event, but a series of misattuned experiences that fractured the self. Children need safety to become whole. Gojo had surveillance. Children need mirroring to understand who they are. Gojo had expectations. He wasn't allowed to be a boy. He was trained to be a bomb. Gojo's identity was forged in a pressure cooker of responsibility and fear. His very existence threatened the old guard of jujutsu society. Instead of being nurtured, he was monitored. Instead of being raised, he was managed. His childhood was not a time of learning or play, but of isolation and weaponization. The cost of untouchability. When we meet him, Gojo is confident, flamboyant, effortlessly powerful. But beneath the blindfold lies something colder than control. Disconnection. Gojo rarely lets people touch him, literally or emotionally. He flirts, jokes, and provokes, but he does not truly connect. This is the profile of emotional dissociation, a common defense mechanism among trauma survivors. When emotional pain becomes too overwhelming, especially in childhood, the mind doesn't fight. It detaches, it numbs, and over time, this detachment becomes mistaken for strength. It becomes part of the persona, the unbothered, impenetrable, too cool to bleed facade. Freud once said, unexpressed emotions will never die. They are buried alive and will come forth later in uglier ways. Gojo's buried emotions erupt in flashes. Rage during battle, cruelty masked as sarcasm, or moments of eerie stillness, where the strongest man in the world suddenly looks lost. The moments when he says things like, if I were to disappear, would anyone even care? Those aren't exaggerations. They're confessions. The curse of exceptionalism. There's a quiet tragedy in always being the best. Gojo isn't arrogant because he's full of himself. He's arrogant because it's the only thing holding him together. No one else can protect the weak, teach, No one else can stop the disaster. No one else has the answers. So Gojo believes he has to be godlike, not for pride, but out of panic. This is a textbook trauma-induced superiority complex. When children grow up feeling unsafe, they often adopt grandiose personas to mask their vulnerability. It's not ego, it's armor. Gojo's power is a shield, not just against curses, but against closeness, because deep down, he knows, if he lets someone in, they might leave, or worse, they might die. He carries the guilt of his own strength like a weight. If someone gets hurt, it's his fault. If a student dies, it's because he wasn't fast enough. Okay? If the system is broken, it's because he hasn't fixed it yet. To be the strongest isn't to be free. It's to be responsible for everything, all the time, alone. Shoko, Shuguru, and the ghost of connection. Among the very few people, Gojo opens up to our Shoko and Shuguru Gido, and this is no accident. They're not just friends. They're the only people who saw him before he became the strongest. In those early flashbacks, we glimpse the rarest version of Gojo. Someone vulnerable, someone curious, someone young. When Gido falls, when he becomes the very monster they once fought, something inside Gojo fractures. He doesn't just lose a friend, he loses the last thread connecting him to his own humanity. This loss is pivotal. It marks the moment Gojo stops trying to be understood and starts performing invincibility. He buries the boy and becomes the symbol. And from that point on, Gojo Satoru isn't just the strongest, it's the loneliest. The mask of limitless control. You're weak, so you lose. I'm strong, so I win. Gojo Satoru can see everything. Every movement, every fluctuation of cursed energy, every possibility the moment it begins to unfold. His 6 eyes do not miss. His limitless technique turns space itself into his playground. Infinite barriers, infinite fractions of time, stretched so thin that no one can ever reach him. He has become a god in a system built on curses. And yet, the more untouchable he becomes, the lonelier he gets. This is the paradox of control. You build walls to protect yourself until one day you realize no one can get in. Not even you. When psychologists speak of dissociation, they describe a split between mind and body, between emotion and action, often born from trauma. It's the brain's way of saying, this is too much, so let me take over. In Gojo's case, the split is cosmic. On the outside, he's flamboyant, sarcastic, all-seeing, untouchable. Okay? On the inside, there's a boy who couldn't stop his friend from dying. A boy who had to grow up faster than anyone should. A boy who saw too much, felt too deeply, and learned to survive by numbing it. Power became his escape route. If he could be the strongest, he'd never be powerless again. But here's the problem. Dissociation works too well. You stop feeling pain. You stop feeling fear. Eventually, you stop feeling anything at all. When Riko Amanai died, Gojo wasn't just protecting a girl. He was clinging to the illusion that he could fix the world. That strength could make him enough. That if he could shoulder everything, then maybe no one else would have to die. But Toji shattered that illusion with a single cut. He reminded Gojo that control is fragile. It's that no matter how fast you think or how strong you become, life still happens in chaos. People still leave. And so, Gojo didn't just resurrect from that loss with new power. He resurrected with a new philosophy. Control everything or lose everything. This is the logic of trauma survivors. When a child grows up in unpredictable conditions, abuse, neglect, loss, they often overcompensate by seeking control later in life. They micromanage relationships. They plan every detail. They don't delegate. They don't trust. And beneath it all is fear. If I let go for even a second, something terrible will happen again. Gojo becomes the strongest sorcerer, not just out of ambition, but out of necessity. Because if he isn't the strongest, who will protect everyone? who will make the hard calls, who will absorb the consequences. No one else can. Okay. But this story isn't just about power. It's about the emotional toll of being the one who never breaks. When you're always the protector, you forget how to be held. When you're always the teacher, you forget how to be taught. When you're always in control, you forget how to rest. There's a scene in the anime where Gojo, standing in the aftermath of another battle, asks Yudaheim, "Do you think I'm the only one who can change this messed up world?" It's a rare moment of vulnerability. A man who is tired of holding the weight of an entire system on his shoulders. It's a man who has won every battle and still feels like he's losing something. And this is what makes his power so tragic. He can stop time, but he can't turn it back. He can block anything except grief. He can protect the world, but not his inner child. The six eyes allow Gojo to perceive cursed energy in perfect detail, to break reality into a map of coordinates and probabilities. But they do not let him see the one thing he desperately needs, a future where he doesn't have to do this alone. Freud once said, "No mortal can keep a secret. Hit, if his lips are silent, he chatters with his fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of him at every pore." Gojo never says he's lonely, but he shows it in how he isolates himself, in how he jokes to deflect intimacy, in how he mentors others while refusing to be vulnerable himself, in how he surrounds himself with people, yet still feels misunderstood. He is the strongest, and therefore the most alone. This is the irony of his curse. His power is infinite, but his emotional life is starved. He can divide space into nanometers and freeze it, but his heart remains untouched, suspended in a kind of spiritual stasis. Because to be emotionally present, you have to be open. And Gojo's whole existence is about never being penetrated. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. This isn't strength. It's a defense mechanism, so advanced it became a lifestyle. It's why his mask of invincibility is so compelling and so dangerous. We look at people like Gojo and think, "I wish I could be that confident, that unbothered, that in control." But what we're really admiring is someone who's mastered the art of not feeling. Someone who's turned their trauma into armor so polished that it blinds even them. In many ways, Gojo represents a cultural fantasy. To be so competent that no one can hurt you. To be so powerful that no one can abandon you. To be so necessary that no one can leave you behind. But what happens when that fantasy becomes a prison? What happens when your whole identity becomes about being limitless and you lose touch with your limits? Gojo doesn't rest. He doesn't cry. He doesn't ask for help. He doesn't allow himself to grieve. Because if he stops, even for a moment, the weight of everything he's been avoiding might crush him. The truth is, control is a trauma response. It's not the sign of someone who's healed. It's a sign of someone still trying to undo a past that refuses to be changed. And the real tragedy, Gojo believes he has to be this way, because the moment he lets his guard down, the world might break again. But he's wrong. Being strong doesn't mean never being soft. Being in control doesn't mean never letting go. And being limitless doesn't mean never needing love. Gojo has infinite defense, but no emotional home. And until he finds one, he will keep mistaking untouchable for invincible. The curse of knowing pain. No one can understand the pain of the strongest. Gojo Satoru, there's something cruel about being exceptional. The world celebrates your strength, but it forgets you still bleed. Gojo says this line not in arrogance, but in quiet despair. It's a confession disguised as a statement. I am in pain, and I'm alone in it. This is the curse of power. Not that it isolates you from others, but that it convinces you they could never possibly understand. And once that belief sets in, something irreversible happens. You stop reaching out. You stop explaining. You stop hoping. And in the silence, your pain metastasizes from a wound into an identity. There is a theory in attachment psychology known as avoidant attachment. It forms when someone learns, often as a child, that expressing need leads to disappointment. That vulnerability is punished, not protected. So they adapt. They stop crying. They stop asking. They become self-reliant, not out of strength, but out of necessity. This is God's true condition. He loses Riko. He loses Gito. And each time, the same pattern repeats. He doesn't break down. He breaks away, further from others, further into himself. Each loss pushes him deeper into the role of the invincible, a savior on the outside, a ghost on the inside. When Gito falls, it's not just a betrayal, it's a mirror, because Gito feels, Gito grieves, Gito rages against the cruelty of the jujitsu world. And when he can't reconcile that pain within the system, he burns it down. But Gojo, he does the opposite. K suppresses it. He internalizes it. K becomes even more devout to the system that cost him his best friend. Not because he believes in it, but because he needs to believe something will make the suffering worth it. This is what makes Gojo's grief so haunting. He doesn't cry, he doesn't scream, he just continues. More powerful, more detached, more alone. 'Cause if he stopped to feel it all, he might not survive it. There's a myth we tell ourselves about strength, that the strong don't feel pain. That pain is weakness, that grieving is indulgent. But Gojo's life disproves all of that. He feels everything. He's just never been allowed to show it. And so, like many high-functioning people who've experienced profound emotional loss, he builds a false self, a version of himself optimized for survival, not authenticity. He becomes performatively fine, smiling, confident, flippant, but never present, never real. Psychologically, this is known as fragmentation. When the psyche endures more than it can process, it splits. Part that feels becomes hidden. The part that performs takes over. For Gojo, that division becomes permanent. The one who mourns Gito is buried under the one who saves students. The one who questions everything is buried under the one who fixes everything. He doesn't collapse, he compartmentalizes. But there's a cost to this kind of strength. You start forgetting who you really are. You become a role, a function, a reputation. And eventually, the soul behind it all starts to wither. When no one protects you, you become someone who protects everyone, even if it kills you. This isn't just a quote, it's Gojo's entire character arc. He learned early on that no one would save him, so he became the one who saves. But there's a quiet violence in this decision. Because when you protect everyone else, you forget how to protect yourself. Gojo never asks for help. He never shows weakness. He never stops moving, because somewhere deep down, he believes that if he ever did pause to feel, he might never get back up. Okay? This is the hidden truth behind his boundless power. It isn't power. It's grief wearing a mask. A mask so convincing that even he forgets what's beneath it. Gito became a curse because he couldn't carry his pain. Gojo became a god because he wouldn't let himself feel his two sides of the same tragedy. One consumed by sorrow, one consumed by silence, and neither of them truly free. There's a moment in Jujutsu Kaisen 0, after Gito's final breath, where Gojo stands alone. He doesn't speak, he doesn't cry, okay? He just lowers his head, not in mourning, but in surrender, as if to say, this is what it means to be me, to carry the weight of everyone, to never let it show, okay? To keep going, even when nothing inside of you wants to. This is not resilience. This is resignation, disguised as duty. And it's a story far too many people know. We romanticize characters like Gojo because they represent a dream that if you're strong enough, smart enough, capable enough, you'll never be hurt again. But in reality, the strongest people are often the ones hurting the most. They've just learned how to hide it better, and in doing so, they build a prison out of their perfection. Gojo's tragedy is not that he lost Gito, it's that he never let himself grieve him. not fully, not honestly. Because to grieve him would mean admitting that even gods bleed. There's a line from Carl Jung that echoes here. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Gojo cannot do that, because to accept himself completely would mean facing the broken boy who still lives inside him. The one who couldn't save Riko, who couldn't save Gito, who couldn't save himself. Okay, and so he puts on the blindfold. He smiles, he jokes, he teaches, and he carries the pain in silence, because that's what the strongest do. They suffer alone, so no one else has to. Power without intimacy is a prison. For someone so powerful, Gojo Satoru lives like a ghost. He's always present, but never quite reachable, smiling, teasing, standing in the room, yet always a step removed. A sense that no matter how close you get to him, there's always more distance to cross. Even among his students, the ones he swears to protect, the ones he trains, mentors, jokes with, there's a line, okay? An invisible boundary that says, you can admire me, you can rely on me, but you can never truly know me. And that boundary isn't arrogance, it's armor. Gojo's playfulness is often mistaken for emotional availability. He's loud, he's dramatic, he's expressive, but expression isn't the same as intimacy. True intimacy requires risk, letting someone see you, not just the polished parts, but the raw ones, scared parts, the shameful parts, the ones you try to forget. And Gojo doesn't do that. He can't, because somewhere deep in him is a belief formed long ago. If I show people who I really am, they'll either leave or get hurt. That belief hardens into a law. One he never says out loud, but follows every day. Keep them close, but not too close. Laugh, but never open up. Protect them, but never need them. There's a term in trauma psychology, hyper-dependence. It describes a survival response where a person avoids relying on others entirely. Not because they're strong, but because needing someone once hurt too much. Or worse, because the people they needed weren't there when it mattered. Hyper-independence says, if I never need you, you can't fail me. If I never depend on you, you can't disappear. Gojo isn't emotionally distant because he doesn't care. He's distant because he cares too much, and every time he's cared deeply, he's lost something irreplaceable. Riko, Gito, the innocence of believing the world was just. So he builds walls. But they don't look like walls. They look like jokes, sunglasses, confidence, aloofness, anything but what they really are, fear. What do you do when you're so strong that no one checks on you? When everyone assumes you're fine because you always appear to be, and you're the one holding up the world. No one thinks to ask if your arms are tired. This is Gojo's quiet prison. He is limitless, but he is also untouchable. Not in the sense that no one can beat him, but in the sense that no one can reach him. That's the paradox of being the strongest. Everyone sees your strength, but no one sees your suffering. The world turns the strongest into symbols. Stop seeing them as people. We see them as shields. And once that transformation happens, the person behind the power starts to disappear. Gojo doesn't live for himself. He lives for others, to teach, to protect, to fix the world that failed him. But in doing so, he forfeits something essential, the right to be known. Because when everyone needs you to be strong, where do you go to be weak? Even when Gojo smiles, there's a loneliness in his eyes. Not loud, not tragic, just resigned. A subtle kind of sorrow that comes from watching life instead of living it. He's adored, admired, even worshipped, but rarely understood. Because the stronger you are, the more people project onto you. They see a savior, a protector, a god, but they don't see you. And eventually, you stop trying to show them. You stop being a person, and become a performance. This isn't just a Gojo problem. It's a human one. We live in a culture that rewards overfunctioning, where being tired is a badge of honor, where needing others is seen as weakness, where the people who have it all together are never asked how they're really doing. But beneath every hyper-competent, overachieving, always smiling exterior is someone who was never taught how to fall apart safely. Gojo's strength is real, but it's also a mask, one he can't take off because he was never given a place to. There's a myth that if you're powerful enough, you'll eventually feel whole, that success, strength, and purpose will fill the void inside you. But that's not how healing works. You can be admired by everyone and still feel invisible. You can protect the world and still feel unprotected. You can be limitless, still be alone. Gojo lives surrounded by people, but no one truly sees him, because the deeper truth is this: power doesn't make you less lonely, just makes it harder to admit that you are. The strongest are often the ones never allowed to fall apart, because if they do, everything they hold might collapse with them. So they don't. They smile. They keep going. They become the thing everyone else leans on. And in the process, they forget what it feels like to be held. This is Gojo's tragedy. Not just that he can't be beaten, but that he can't rest. There's always someone to save, always something to fix, always a reason to stay in control, but no moment to simply be held, without expectation, without performance, without the mask. If pain isolates and strength hides the pain, then Gojo is locked in a double bind. He can't stop being strong, and he can't ask for softness, because softness was never safe. And so, every day, he plays the part, not just for the world, but for himself. Because if he let the mask slip even for a moment, he might have to admit how lonely he truly is, and that, more than any enemy, is the one thing Gojo Satoru has never been able to face: the strength to be soft. What would healing look like for someone like Gojo Satoru? Not applause, not another victory, not more power added to an already immeasurable arsenal. Get something quieter, something smaller, something infinitely harder. To be held, to be seen, without earning it through strength. That kind of healing doesn't come from winning. It comes from surrender, not to defeat, but to humanity. And for someone like Gojo, who's built his life around being invincible, surrender is the scariest thing of all. 'Cause here's the secret that people rarely say out loud: it's easier to be strong than to be vulnerable. It's easier to keep performing, to stay useful, impressive, touchable, than to let someone see the parts of you that are scared, ashamed, or small. Especially when the world taught you that love must be earned, that safety is conditional, that softness gets punished. Gojo doesn't just fear weakness, he fears what it might reveal. That underneath the limitless, there is still a boy, one who wasn't protected, one who was left alone, one who carries a wound too old to name. And if that boy ever came to the surface, what would happen? Would anyone stay? In trauma recovery? Tech. There's a phrase that sounds simple, but holds immense power. You didn't deserve what happened to you. That sentence breaks the narrative of earned pain. It says, your suffering isn't proof of failure. Your wounds are not evidence that you are lacking, lazy, or not good enough. But when you're conditioned to believe love must be deserved, pain becomes the tax you pay to feel worthy. This is God's unconscious pattern. If he suffers enough, maybe he can keep everyone safe. If he's strong enough, maybe he won't be left again. And so, strength becomes his salvation, but also his prison. Real resilience isn't just about enduring. It's about feeling, grieving, crying, letting your guard down, letting someone in. It's not always noble or beautiful. Sometimes it's messy and uncomfortable. Sometimes it means admitting you don't have all the answers. Sometimes it means being seen in your most unguarded moment and not being rejected for it. Gojo doesn't need more technique. He doesn't need more praise. What he needs is space to fall apart. and know that he won't lose love by doing so. In a softer world, Gojo would have grown up believing this. You are not lovable because you are strong. You are lovable because you are you. But the world he inherited and the world he protects does not teach softness. It teaches survival. So he becomes a god, a myth, an ideal. And yet, deep down, he remains what he always was, a boy who needed someone to stay. We often ask the wrong questions of the strong. We ask, how do you do it all? We admire their stoicism, their stability, their endless capability. But maybe we should be asking, what if you had to bury to survive? What parts of you were never allowed to exist? What would it feel like to be loved without needing to earn it? Because behind every high-functioning, overperforming protector is someone who learned that softness was dangerous. And sometimes, the bravest thing that person can do is not hold everything together, but let themselves unravel. Gojo's journey isn't one of redemption. It's not a clear-cut arc where everything gets better. He doesn't get closure. He doesn't get the perfect ending. But maybe, just maybe, there's a quieter transformation happening. Not in his technique, not in his rank, but in his heart. Maybe the strongest thing Gojo could ever do is to admit that he's tired, to allow someone to comfort him, to say, I can't do this alone, and believe that someone will answer. You don't have to. So we arrive at the question, what strength have you mistaken for safety? Is it your perfectionism, your silence, your independence, your constant need to be the one who has it all together? What parts of you are aching to be held, but have never been given permission to surface? Because maybe, like Gojo, your armor helped you survive. But survival isn't the same as living. Living means being soft, being messy, being real. It means letting someone see your trembling hands and choosing to stay anyway. Gojo tells himself, no one can understand the pain of the strongest. But what if the truth is simpler? The strongest don't need to be understood. They need to be loved. And love, real unconditional love, doesn't require performance. It doesn't demand perfection. It doesn't care how many battles you've won. It only asks, can I see you? And will you let me stay? Maybe Gojo never gets that answer. Maybe we don't either. But maybe the act of asking is a beginning, okay? Way back from detachment, a way back from performance, a way back to being human, okay? And maybe, just maybe, the most courageous thing you can do, okay, is to stop performing perfection and let yourself be real. You don't have to be the strongest. You don't need to be invincible to be worthy of love. You don't have to keep proving that you're okay. You don't have to keep showing up as the one who always has it together. You don't have to carry every burden just to feel like you deserve to exist. You are not your usefulness. You are not your achievements. You are not your strength. You are the one who needed it. And that's where this story really began. Not with the 6 eyes, not with the limitless, not with all the power Gojo Satoru collected just to keep the world from slipping through his fingers. It began with a boy who was left alone. A boy who learned too early that being soft meant being shattered. A boy who thought he had to become a shield just to be safe. Maybe you were that boy. Maybe you were that girl. Maybe you were that child who thought, if I'm just good enough, strong enough, perfect enough, maybe I'll finally be loved the way I need it. But you don't have to live in that armor anymore. You don't need a reason to be held. You don't need to earn rest. You are allowed to exist, just as you are, even if you're still healing. Even if you're not strong today, even if you're not sure what happens next, that's okay. Let yourself be loved before you become invincible. Let yourself rest before you finish the story, because you were never just the strongest. You were the one who needed someone. You were the one who kept going anyway. And you are still here. You don't have to be the strongest. You just have to be real. You are not your power. You're the one who needed it.